Um, okay, health warning that I was a financial journalist myself, and that's what informs my interest in this topic. I first became interested in the effects of financial journalism on the market when the financial crisis hit, and Damien Tambini at the LSE wrote a paper called What is Financial Journalism for in a Time of Crisis and Change? This paper is called Knowledge Construction and Reflexivity in Financial Journalism. I'll just read the abstract to you, and then I'll begin with my analysis. Can you keep me to time and let me know?
Yes.
Like
how long
minutes,
do you want?
20 minutes.
Okay.
So the relative performativity of any social process is closely linked to the reflexivity of its actors, and I'm asserting that. In this regard, financial journalists are, in relation to the performance of the financial market, are no different. So financial markets are predicated on information for rapid price discovery, and for this reason, intermediating systems are a key component of their reification and legitimization. The reflexivity of financial journalists in understanding their self-constitution, professional objectives, and knowledge construction processes as intermediating actors are therefore analysed in this study to ascertain their awareness about the extent to which they believe they shape the performance of the financial market with discourse and frame analysis of interviews with highly experienced financial journalists. And I use the term intermediating in a polyvalent sense here, and I'm asserting that it's a stronger form of intermediating, but I'll kind of get into that. I'll begin with what financial journalists are in the economy today. Your work's informed a lot of the historiography that I use in this paper, Mary. Wayne Parsons asserts that actually financial journalism can be thought of as the articulation of capitalism. If we think of Merton's work, 1948, the Self-Fulfilling Prophecy Speech Act, the Power of Rhetoric, all the things we've been talking about today, it's an enabling literary artifact of socially integrative practice, as Alexandre Preda said in his work. Also, financial journalists in the financial market have a social mission. They are a regulatory system that is, we talk about the fact that they're always doing investigative work, and that's very much contemplated through some of the frame analysis that I use in this work. If we look at some of Alexandre Preda's work, he talks about the fact that framing markets also include and contemplate process of lamination. So we talk about observational boundaries where that market opens up itself for scrutiny, and this is one of the functions that the financial market does in terms of how we frame and understand its constitution. So the intuition that journalism affects the financial market has been spoken about today in Armin's presentation, Diego's presentation. We'll look at that in the quantitative dimensions as well. And that's a fairly straightforward intuition that, that information in newspapers will affect the market, stock prices will go up and down. And there are other things like company reports and so on that contribute to those stock prices, but certainly the media can have quite a big effect, which I found in my own quantitative research. But the extent to which it is performative through a reflexive lens has not really been interrogated in the literature, in my opinion. And this is what my research explores, how reflexive journalists are about that performative dimension of their work through their own self-consciousness and deliberateness with their professional practices and knowledge construction. There's a quote by Aldridge and Efford that asserts that financial journalism is a wholly performative and intensely reflexive occupation and constantly talks to itself, about itself, and that in that self-referentiality it impacts onto the craft style constitution of their job. And this craft issue is something that I want to get into quite a lot in terms of the professional contemplation of journalism in the market and how they understand themselves as information actors, because it's also about how we understand the value of craft as opposed to high art and professions, and whether medicine is more valuable than plumbing and so on. Okay, so I just want to say that I hence look, so what I've identified in terms of the gaps of the literature is, as I said, the reflexivity about the performativity of these knowledge construction processes. So I hence look at how financial journalism, how reflexive financial journalists are about their knowledge construction processes and how that conforms to their professional schemata and informs their working processes. So I'm going to run quickly through some prior research in this area. As I mentioned, Mary's work looks at some of the historiography and how journalism evolved from Lloyd's coffee shop in Lombard Street, where merchants would come and look at shipping price lists, lists of various commodities and so on that they were trading. And at some point, with the invention of political economy and the market itself, narrative starts getting interwound with some of the political issues around the market. So it kind of starts exceeding stock tipping. And we'll see that in the self-constitutive like understanding of themselves, journalists are closer to like sell-side analysts in terms of what they understand themselves. So that's buy and sell recommendations in quite a simplistic form. But actually opinion and analysis, and there's a whole lot of interesting things in terms of what they understand themselves are doing. And what's kind of come through is this idea of intermediation, but I'll get into that in quite a bit of detail. So financial journalism therefore became disentangled from its source materials in adopting narrative form. So from just being lists of data, we now add narrative to this. And one of the things that I want to assert as well is making reference to the work of Mary Morgan, where narratives are also models. Okay, so one of the other things that I want us to bear in mind as well is what came up earlier, Taylor's question about algorithms, and how we're living in an increasingly complex information environment where prices are literally moving around the planet at light speed, and we've got temporal conflation, we've got temporal coordination, which you'll see in Karen Knorr-Settiner's work. So, and also with the rise of PR and citizen journalism, and everybody's online these days, that investigative function is being compromised. That professional kind of ethos about who is a journalist, who can speak as a journalist, that's in some ways compromising some of the investigative work, the unveiling of malfeasance and so on. So that's kind of the background into which we're operating. And Tambini says that journalism at the moment really needs to interrogate financial journalism, needs to interrogate what its purpose is. I now want to go into this issue of intermediation. Because intermediation and information is, as I said, the financial market is predicated on information in order to, enable price discovery. So, in the traditional financial literature per se, I mean, there's like papers like Romack, some of the ones you mentioned, Fang, Paris, Chan earlier today. They look at the financial journalist as an intermediary. So that's an information system that transmits information intact. So that's the reporting function, like journalists are reporting the facts, relaying the story. And it's interesting in some of the interviews how this kind of agnosticism about an interpretive deliberativeness, is there such a word, deliberativeness? Like an interpretive deliberate act in terms of what they're doing. And they seem to kind of insist that they're reporting information, and I'll unpack that quite a lot, because that was quite an interesting revelation that came to me, and also in terms of their reputation and credibility and what intermediating systems do and the value we attach to information in a market that has so much information. I just want to kind of digress into information economics, because something's occurring to me about information. Information is like a very strange commodity, because unlike other commodities, the more demand there is for it, the cheaper it gets. So this is why you pay 10p for the Sun, but you pay what's the FT cost today, £3, and you pay £20 for the American Economic Review, because the more like kind of niche the information is, the more expensive it becomes. Then information also has strange properties. If you duplicate it and transmit it, it's still the same. It doesn't change its form, and it can be infinitely replicated. I'm just kind of throwing some of these issues out there because it's quite interesting when we look at the interviews how journalists understand the work they're doing. So now I want to extend this concept of intermediation, and I want to look at the work of Barbara Sionaskwa, not saying that properly. And she's looking at sort of intermediating systems through the lens of media theory, so the classic work of McLuhan and so on, that there's actually diffusive processes happening in institutionalizing functions and the background. So that's saying that journalists, by mediating, are framing information. They don't just report, they're definitely participating in framing, analyzing, and interpreting the market. So just some other literature that is informing how I'm treating my PhD research is I look also at processes of like also value and assets and how we look at things in the market. I've been very excited by the work of Michel Lemont and evaluated practices of how speech acts can codify, sanctify, and canonize things in the market and create value through them. And I think, if you think about bubbles, the tech bubble, the credit bubble, subprime, credit derivatives, and so on, all these things were spoken up by the media. And I've got various papers where I look at some of these bubbles that are created through speech acts. So, and then also the work of Cagnon. I use actor network theory quite a lot in the way I contemplate the market. The processes of economization can't be separated out from the effects produced by those agencies that directly seek to look at what the economy is. And I also look at a lot of the work at Grenoveta and linguistic embeddedness, which also informs the new sociology of economics. So essentially I just did a lot of interviews at different levels. At the first level I did structured interviews with very experienced financial journalists. And I kind of asked them how they understood themselves. So I'm looking at the self-identification of how they understand their constitution. And then that revealed like some tensions and so on. So then I did some semi-structured interviews to kind of check. So those were like kind of longer interviews and more, and I let the journalists talk a lot more. So I'll just kind of briefly, how am I doing for time?
Halfway through.
Okay. So one of the things that comes up as a main sort of professional value, and how I thought about the professional values of journalism, I kind of just looked at some of Jan Goldstein's work, looking at the Foucauldian contemplation of discipline and the disciplines, and she says that professions are a secular analogue of the clergy and should have a sort of social mission, is one of the things that journalism does within that framework. So this ideal of being objective, relaying the facts, relaying information is like a very prime value within journalists. But then in the interviews, what also was revealed, that even though they aspire to be, it's like any profession, what we want to be doing is one thing, but then we end up doing in reality is another thing entirely. So they aspire to be objective, but in reality they said that their own cultural biases, their compromising relationships with PR. There was, it was interesting because when I also interviewed, for my second research chapter, I'm looking at PR. So I asked the PRs whether they spend time with journalists. They said they're spending tons of time with journalists, and journalists said they weren't spending much time with PRs. So this one group was lying. But I think when I then asked in the semi-structured interviews about these tensions that come up, I think what people say is kind of, when the journalist is going to go meet with the PR, it's kind of thinking, oh, now I'm meeting with a company, and sort of forgets that the PR chaperone is there and kind of directing the conversation. And for the PR, the journalist would be top of their minds. And also the thing is with the resources of journalism being more and more constrained these days, a lot of journalists are just sort of printing press releases, and that's another problem altogether. A news value. One quote that kept coming up when I asked people about where news values come from is this famous quote by Lord Northcliffe, and it says, whatever news is what somebody somewhere wants to suppress, the rest is advertising. So, and there definitely seemed to be, okay, so if there's a performativity and reflexivity around journalists, and they were definitely aware of the fact that they affect markets, but then one would think that markets would know that and try and influence the work of journalists. And journalists said that generally they thought companies were trying to paint themselves in a positive light, and this was informing their work quite a lot. Whenever they got press releases, well, I mean, the good journalists would look beyond those press releases and think, what's the company trying to conceal and so on. But what I really want to concentrate on is this idea of information, and whether journalism is just a reporting of the facts, or whether there's more of a reflexive analysis and a more deliberate sort of narrative interpretation going on. So there's a quote that I have in my paper, which is about whether journalists are aware that their work is affecting the market. And the quote says, yes, they are aware of it, but they should take more responsibility in getting it right, or they will compromise the reputation that is essential to the ability in the first place. The journalist knows the information they have can move the market. It is not the journalist who moves the market, it is the act of reporting market-moving information that moves the market. To say the journalist moves the market focuses attention on the wrong thing. It is the information that is important. The same information in the hands of any range of journalists would be equally market-moving, just as it would if it was released by a sell-side analyst or a regulator or company. Okay, so now journalists are competing with other journalists, they're competing with analysts. I was trying to figure out what separates journalists from analysts, what separates them from other journalists. So they thought that in comparison to other journalists, they had more of a understanding of economics and a calculative ability that helped them to do their work. But they felt that the work of all journalists should be to report the facts and get to the bottom of the story. As regards analysts, they said that, there's quite a funny one that says, well, journalists can write better, but they're worse at math. That's what they thought the difference between a journalist and an analyst was. So, if this information, so kind of I just want to kind of say where my research is going to now, and this is, I've written another paper about narrative epidemics and crises and so on. So the financial law does contemplate journalism as price-sensitive news, so also the legal structures that enable markets in the economy also contemplates this as an issue. But then, of course, in democracies, we've got this issue of freedom of speech. So whenever I talk about the regulation of financial journalism, people say that I'm now going to dangerous territory because now I'm talking about censorship. And I don't think those are the same thing. I just want to say that I just don't think that's the same thing. And I also just want to say that I think that we need to think about how we're going to regulate for narrative risks in markets, because we spoke this morning about algorithms getting news wrong, journalists not being, as financial instruments get more and more complex today as well, and journalists maybe due to lack of resources and training and financial knowledge not able to interpret that information quickly enough. I think we can stop talking about narrative risk in financial markets that we need to talk about. I'm just going to end there. Cheers.